My wife could grow anything. She really had an affinity with plants, seemingly even preferring them to the company of humans. Not that she was a recluse by any means. Once she became comfortable with you, she had the most infectious laugh and smile. It was almost magnetic. You just couldn't help but want to be around her. I met her during my final year at college. The first time when we stumbled into her apartment after one too many cheap beers, I couldn't help but notice, even amidst our clumsy drunken groping in the dark, the sheer volume of plants growing in her room. Being the smug bastard I am, I took her on a picnic to the botanical gardens. As a surprise for our second date, and the radiant smile that she gave me when she realized where we were was more dazzling than any of the flowers in the whole damn garden. I fell hard, and I fell fast. 5 years later, after our time in the dark, dingy apartments, eating top ramen, we bought a bright, sunlit house with a spacious garden. 1 month after that, I knelt in the dirt in the same garden, surrounded by the newly growing flowers, and I asked her to be my wife. Our house was always bursting with color. Flowers, fruits, vegetables. She even managed to grow a lemon tree in our kitchen before it got too intrusive, and we replanted it in the front yard. She worked as a biology teacher at the local middle school and was loved by her students. Even the hormonal prepubescent monsters I take all middle children to be did not deter her from wanting a large family. It was sooner than I would have liked, as we were both fairly young. The idea of my own kid to teach and play video games with grew on me. So with great ceremony, she threw out the rest of her birth control, and the daily sex we had in the following months would have made a sailor blush. I was young, in love, and living the dream. Children were not meant to be, however. After the immense joy of our first positive pregnancy test, a miscarriage followed, and then another. Each feeling of joy was quickly replaced by loss and heartbreak. She threw herself even more vehemently into botany. The plants she grew were nothing short of breathtaking. Maybe the universe was compensating for her inability to grow a child. Or it was something always innate in her, but it seemed like she always knew precisely what each plant needed. She could grow fruits and vegetables out of season, and her flowers grew larger and more vivid than they naturally should. Then she was pregnant again. She waited until past the first trimester to tell me. When the dangers of a miscarriage had passed, it was a boy. We were ecstatic. We converted one of our plant rooms into a nursery, complete with baby blue hydrangea flowers and white orchids. For the next few months, I saw my wife smile in all its dazzling beauty, not a mere shadow. That Tuesday when I left for work was the last time I saw that smile, or any iteration of it. She was 6 months pregnant. I remember resting my hand on her swelling stomach as I kissed her goodbye. She was wearing a yellow dress, the same shade as sunflowers she grew by the front door. When I came home from work that night, the house was dark. My wife was nowhere to be found. I searched the garden and all the rooms of the house before I thought to check the nursery. There my wife was, kneeling on the floor in a yellow dress stained dark red and brown, her hair and hands covered with what looked to be dirt. She had lost the baby. I wish I could tell you that I took her into my arms and comforted her, that I took her to the doctor and cared for her and sought out a therapist. I can't claim any of these things. I remember leaving her in that yellow dress, in that damn room, sobbing alone on the bathroom floor. I remember picking up a bottle, and I don't ever remember putting it down. The plants in the house all died. We both walked around like ghosts, never speaking to one another. She kept all the windows shuttered and closed. We slept apart. She slept in the nursery. For my part, I couldn't even bring myself to approach that part of the house. As inside the baby blue nursery filled with so much rage. Her hands were always covered with dirt. I didn't care enough to wonder why, as all the plants were dead, and the thought of her alone, tending to dead and wilted plants in the empty nursery, was too much for my frail state of mind. Then I started to hear crying. I would wake up in the middle of the night, in my still drunk state, and I could swear I could hear a baby crying. I would always shrug it off, as my wife crying, and the sound being distorted by the 9 or so beers I had to have to get me some sleep. It was soft and muffled at first, barely recognizable as human. With the passing weeks, it sounded more and more like a newborn. I switched from beer to whiskey, and then started taking Vicodin. Then came the scraping. I could hear a faint scraping noise coming from the nursery down the hall. It sounded like someone dragging nails across the wooden floor. I stopped going to work. I finally gathered my resolve to approach the nursery that evening, as my wife briefly left the house for the first time in 2 weeks. The first thing I noticed when I opened the door was the stench of decay. It was pitch black and darker than the rest of the house, so I turned the flashlight app on my phone. Next, I noticed the decomposing blue flowers of the nursery. But as our whole house was full of decaying plants, I was expecting it. There was dirt everywhere. The carpet was black with loose soil. Most of it was originating from the baby crib in the corner. I was seized with cold fear at the sight of the crib. Something more powerful and sobering than the usual haze of rage that I lived with. Something kept me moving closer, and once I made out what was lying amidst the dirt and blood, I promptly expelled the whiskey I had an hour ago. I saw my son, my baby son that died, when he should have been no bigger than a pear, but somehow was the size of a newborn, and somehow alive. Yet, his skin was moldy gray and stained with dirt, with long root-like appendages extending from his torso in every direction. His fingers and toes were elongated into roots. Every once in a while, I would see a root slither in the dirt. As I turned my phone light on him, I saw him recoil, his mouth open to a scream as he tried to burrow deeper into the soil, his appendages scraping against the wood. I quickly turned off my phone. The light seemed to hurt him. I smiled in the dark. My wife could grow anything.